Um, and for everyone who's listening right now, this meeting is being recorded, and we're hoping that after all the sessions, we can upload them at some point so that people can go back and have a look at the things that have been discussed. So it's very, very chill, very relaxed. I'm going to do like a brief introduction. And then if you want to like say anything or just like present anything that you've got, anything that you've got prepared, feel free. And then it's just going to be like a back and forth interview style. Just chill, relax. People, feel free to pop questions in the chat. So that let me make it official. Welcome back to day 2 of Decolonization in Practice. Feels so good to say that. We're kicking off the day with something a little more casual, like I said before, and it is my absolute pleasure to be joined by your NUS Vice President for Higher Education, Hilary Gyebi-Ababio. Did I pronounce that correctly?
No, but it's okay.
No?
It's the
Oh my
end.
God.
It's the end of Black History Month. So all of my corrections have been spent. I put tokens in a jar and it's finished. So don't
Oh
worry,
my
you've got the
goodness.
free
Okay.
pass.
I'm gonna
Um,
have you do it again later.
that's fine. I mean, I didn't even put my surname in my name, so don't worry. Like anything goes in this call. But thank you so much for having me. I think this probably is going to rank as one of my favorite events I've done all month because I think being in a space where we can just talk casually is just something that I've been yearning for. I miss people, I miss
Yeah.
conversations. And especially because we're speaking about such a human topic, I think
Mhm.
decolonization seems so academic to most because we're speaking about it in an educational environment. But like it's about humanity and
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I'm here. I'm so glad that I was hosting last night. I was in your shoes last night
Yeah.
for the panel event. And so it's nice to be able to be in this space and talk to you, especially because I think we've taken this journey together. I think
Yeah.
I remember when I was an officer last year at Bristol and like
Yeah.
I don't know how it was. I was just like, I need some postgraduate advice. And then you popped up. And then we ended up having like a long
A
call,
long conversation. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
which was so lovely. So it's good to be here. And I think it's a really, really important topic movement to be speaking about right now, especially because this year has been a wake-up call for a lot of us that weren't already in this space, not
Mhm.
weren't already, comfortable going into this line of work. And so is incredibly timely, incredibly important, and incredibly good to be here to speak about decol.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hillary. And I guess, I mean, that just kind of like flows on nicely into like the real reason why we're here. We're, trying to like get into like the nitty-gritty of everything. So yesterday, for instance, we had like lots and lots of context into decolonization, getting people to like get on board, people who didn't have any clue on what decolonization is about. And I guess what we're trying to do with this session is like talk about actually what does decolonization look like in practice. We've been talking about it for quite a while now, and it's just about, for instance, if somebody who's listening or who's watching right now wants to get started in decolonization work, what is it that they should bear in mind? What should they do? How do they start? And I know that people are going to have questions throughout, so again, like I said before, please put it in the chat. um, and yeah, should we just kick it off and just
Yeah,
with the
let's
with the
go.
headline question: what is decolonization in practice?
That's that's such a big question.
Yeah.
Decolonization in practice is a lot of things, and I think like it's very diverse. And I keep saying diverse. I'm reclaiming diverse at the moment. That's my thing at the moment. Diverse, not in the way that university traditionally use it, but diverse in the true sense of the word, which means that it takes many streams and many shapes and sizes in how deco is done. And so at a basic level, decolonization in practice is actually starting to do the active work to really dismantle the colonial legacy, colonial structures that continue to persist and impact the world we live in today. And when we think about education, for example, I think that spans out in ways that, now that we've come to a space where I think people are really aware and and alive to decolonizing the curriculum. But I think now we're in a space where we're really looking at the wider part of decolonizing the university, and decolonizing education in the most holistic sense possible. So in practice, that looks really, really different for different types of people. I mean, it's like what it means for an education officer dealing with sort of the curriculum, or dealing with pedagogy, which is teaching. I don't want to use all of the academic jargon, but I'm so used to it. Um, might look at it in that way. But for example, for a student on the ground, that might be, looking at what it means for the student experience. How do you experience university? How is education delivered? What is the purpose of education in this space? And so it's a really it's big, but I think it's big in the sense that everybody can get involved in it, and everybody can be a part of it in with and this is something Larissa said last night, with the tools that they have to bring. um and so, yeah, it's the dismantling of the colonial structures and colonial legacy. But I think most importantly, it's also about that rebuilding of an education system, of a society, of a world that is actually truly decolonial in nature, and freeing for all, which is really important in how I perceive and really connect with decolonization work.
Thanks, Hilary. I think that was like very, very well explained. And the couple of things that you mentioned there, and if you see me just, looking away, that's because I'm typing and trying to like, get that everything you're saying. And I agree with the fact that you said, it's very diverse. It takes many streams. And, I couldn't just help but think, when maybe it's, let's say an officer team, for instance, want to start work in decolonization, and they have like so many different things to like look at, like you said, it is in so many different streams: education, welfare, and all of that. What do you think the first thing should be, like what point of, or what level in the university do you
Hmm.
think they should look at first of all in terms of decolonizing, I don't know, the curriculum, or just decolonization in
Yeah.
general? Like, what should that first thing be that they should look at?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the temptation is always to go to senior management, and I think sometimes we get sort of held up in this work, because I think the ways that things are done in universities always seem to come from this top-down approach, where like you convince senior management, you do all of that strategic work, and then it feeds down into operational work. But I think the beauty of decolonization work is that, like, where you start is your speciality as an officer team. You start with the students you represent. You start with the people on the ground, the people at the grassroots, and really build your way up. And I think that's important, because I think the nature of decolonization work means that you have to go to the root. You have to go to the foundation, and build, and first of all uproot what's in the foundation that is causing colonial legacy, colonized structures to persist and pervade our education system. And you start to refertilize the ground, replant seeds. And I think the people that are the seeds that are being planted are the next generation, our students now, today, being in the space of education where it's being delivered. And actually, I think students have a fresh perspective of what a real decolonial world looks like, because they're the ones that are reimagining and being creative, and actually taking a stand on what they actually want to see out of their education. And in that, I think that's where sort of thinking about decolonization is a lot about content, but also about processes, right? It's like you can't do decolonization in the traditional way, because decolonization forces you to be a collective, to treat people as partners and architects in a collective way. And so I think it's important, especially for officer teams, because I know it's a really, really tough one to broach with universities. Always start with students, always start with the grassroots. And when you engage students, it becomes more so a doable project, because you've got that on the ground like work that is willing to see it go through in a really sustainable way. Especially because decolonization isn't going to happen in a year or in 2 years, but it's a long-term project that we need to continue working at and going for. But I think that's a really interesting question, because I think we're now in a space where I think as officer teams, we are doing it in such a tangible way now that, like, it is a really important question to think about: where do we start, and how do we do that? So great question. I think that really, I hope that really speaks to people starting on this journey and try to figure out where they go from.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you very much, Hilary. Please, guys, if you have any questions or comments on that, feel free to pop it in the chat or use the question and answers function in the bottom of the screen. Um, Again, a lot of interesting things that I picked from there, and I like the fact that you've covered, SABs and well, SABs for short, sabbatical officers. Because I remember yesterday we were doing a session and Storm was like, "What are SABs?" So SABs are sabbatical officers, also known as
Yeah.
student union representatives who take time out of their studies to represent students at the university. So yeah, you mentioned SABs, you've mentioned students.
Mhm.
I would be very, very interested in knowing how staff members, play a role in decolonization. And there's a lot to unpack there, but just in terms of getting them on board, in terms of getting them to see that, especially if they're not from ethnic minority backgrounds and they probably do not see a problem with the system or they do not see that there's anything that needs to be changed. How do we kind of like buy them on board?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting question, especially because I think allyship is a really interesting space to think about this from. And I think the first thing is I think there needs to be a differentiation because I think SU staff come from a very different space than like university staff when they're in those structures. And so I'll start with SU staff. And I think for SU staff, I think it's a really interesting journey for them because being in a union means that you're already in a place of change. You're in a space and a place where change is constantly happening, being formed, imagined, and created. And so I think in terms of SU staff being able to engage with that, I think there needs to be a level of freeing yourselves up. And I say that because I think because so much of our work relies on us being able to find avenues to work with the university in a really streamlined and coordinated way. Sometimes it's hard to be able to find the space and the capacity to do this reimagining work and this really outside of the box work because it doesn't necessarily fit into the regular streams of work that you're doing. And so for SU staff, I would say like allow your SABs to be able to take a lead, and where you can like make yourself the space and the time to really digest what decolonization really is and resource and build up the resources for your own self-learning and the learning of those around you, to really get that work going in a way that allows you to have the space and capacity for that. On the other hand, I think when we think about university stuff, I think they're in a particularly interesting space with this because I think there's a few things, right? There's the fact that first of all, a lot of university staff tend to be very overwhelmed by the concept of decolonization, especially because they've gotten to where they've gotten to because of like a very long establishment within the current structure. It's like you see university staff that have been there 10, 20, like 30 years at a university, and so have a very good grasp on how things are done and how things work. And decolonization beckons you to sort of let go of that and actually wrestle with the things that you know to be your normal. And I think that's really, really hard. Like I think it's really, really hard to sort of let go of the things that you're inherently is a weird word, but like that you've gotten used to and you're good at, and actually allow yourself to be freed to learn and unlearn, to be convinced of something different to what you know, and to really wrestle with processes and actually wrestle with what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it's impacting the people around you. And so I think in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that in terms of university stuff being able to get on board with this, I think there needs to be a level of Professor, I've been on a few panel events with Professor Yudi Archibong, who is a professor at Salford University. She's a Black woman professor, which I love. And she calls it cultural humility. And I would really encourage that of university staff and in many ways SU staff who have gotten so skilled at being able to work in ways that see students be able to get the wins that they need, and have that cultural humility to be able to welcome that change, understanding that it's going to benefit you as much as it's benefiting those that have been invisibilized, marginalized, and left out of the narrative for so long. And actually welcome the space to have your work and have the processes that you're so used to challenged, and welcome that to see a more enhanced, enriching educational experience, not only for your students but for you as well. And so I think that's incredibly important in engaging them in that work and making it doable. So I hope that was practical. I don't know, it was a lot of talking.
Yeah,
um
well, I mean, I think you made some really good points there, and that's why I would like encourage people to make comments on whatever it is that they, just like get involved with the conversation. And I like the part where you mentioned learning and unlearning, and I think that's where most of the work on decolonization tends to start. When you look at, you see that there's an issue, you probably had certain ideas of what this could be about, and then you're trying to unlearn, certain things that made you fixed in your way, and just trying to like be more flexible to like implement change. And I particularly like this question that's just come in from Hazel, and they said, well, she said, HE, higher education institutions, particularly a lot of the older ones, take forever to implement change. And I can swear by this. I've seen this in firsthand. So,
mm,
and the question is, what do you think student engagement staff should focus on at a local level, that we that a local level that we can do while the cogs are grinding into motion at institutional level? I think this is a fantastic question, because it's kind of like almost in contrast with the previous question that I asked, in terms of those who haven't seen any need to change anything, and how can we get them on board. But this looks like you know maybe the engagement staff are already kind of working on this, and they want to like take it, like do something tangible, even if it's the small wins.
mm.
So what would you say about that?
I think I agree. I think that's a particularly important question, and I think when we think about student engagement staff, keeping it going, because I think that that's also been the nature of decolonial work, but also like any work to do with racial inequality. I think it's important that like we have seasons like this year, for example, where things shock you into action and make you feel galvanized, and then like people sort of are attracted to it for a period of time and then get back to their own lives because like the shock factor has sort of taken away from them. And I don't think that it should be like that, but it happens, right? Like it happens that people have a time where like they are focusing on the problem, and then life happens again, and then they have to try and juggle everything again. And so I think in those dry periods, in the periods especially where universities are taking a long time to get things through, I think it's important that, like, at the student engagement level, you are empowering and enabling students to actually start to think about what a reimagined and recreated education system looks like. I think sometimes people are so intimidated and in many ways so enthralled or are so like attracted to debating what the deconstructing and the dismantling looks like, that they forget that like a lot of this is actually also about reimagining and recreating. And when you give students the space to create in those spaces, when you allow students to start to build that, I think it really keeps the momentum, especially, but also it keeps the engagement going, where it might feel that universities are doing something that is slowing down sort of that dismantling process that you need to see happen to get students into that space. What I would say though is that I would flip that question a little bit on its head, um, because I think this decolonization work um, doesn't need to depend on universities doing whatever they might need to do bureaucratically to make it happen. And I say that because like decolonization work is made from the grassroots. It's been built and established by the grassroots, and it's essentially the grassroots that are going to be the people that will make that change. And so sometimes, like I said earlier, like it feels that that change is centered in the university and senior management, but the reality is that like they have to jump on the bus at some time. And so the most important thing for you to do is to keep on going, and when they're ready to jump on the bus, I think the moment they do that, it really unleashes the ability for students and those that have been at the grassroots to actually lead. And I think it's important because like decolonization work, let me be quite frank, can't be led by university senior management or by universities that are inherently built on the colonial legacy, because like it doesn't work like that. It has to be built by those that have first of all like had the effect of the colonial legacy invisibilized and erased their experiences and their ability to thrive in this environment. But also it needs to be built by those that are willing and ready to reimagine without having that stake in the colonial legacy that has benefited them for so long, right? And so I think it's important that like whilst it might seem arduous that universities have all of their bureaucracy, like I don't think you really need to care about that. Like, do what you need to do, engaging the students and engaging the people on the ground, and the rest will follow. And I think that's the essence of it.
Thank
Great
you.
question.
Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, I think that was a fantastic question. And there was something you mentioned about decolonization work starting from the grassroots. And I think that kind of answers the question of somebody in the chat who said, why start with students? They don't control the curriculum, which is very interesting. And I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that. But just again, on the part where you said, just doing all of this just so at some point the university then they jump on the bus and then they get involved in the conversations and try to start restructuring. But then I would ask like a slightly difficult question: what if they never jump on the bus? What if they say they never acknowledge the importance of decolonization, or decolonizing the curriculum? What if they never see the need to do so? Like, what then? And we're
Mm,
hoping that doesn't happen, but what then?
yeah. No, and I think actually that's a question that like is probably an inevitable reality for some institutions in some parts of the sector. So I think it's an incredibly important question. Speaking to the first question about like why do we need to do, like, why start with students, they don't control the curriculum. Um, like, personally, I think it's wild that students don't have a stake in what they're being taught, and don't get to have that space to actually contribute to what they're being taught in a really collaborative way. um I think what's actually interesting about that, especially in a higher education setting, because obviously decolonization is across the whole education system, but within higher education specifically, what's interesting with that is that, like, in higher education, the hierarchies that we find about like the people that set the curriculum and the people that are students, and like where those boundaries lie, really just doesn't make sense to me. I think when you're in education, you're forever a student. You are forever a student. Your lecturer is still a student. The person that's teaching you is still a student. Everybody's constantly learning. And so I think the fundamental that needs to start with that question is that, like, why don't you start with students when students are what universities are made up of? Like, that's what it is. Like, education is made up of students because we're all constantly learning. And when you think about that, like, students being like what makes up HE, I think it's important to know that, like, if students are making up HE but not being the ones that are devising the curriculum that they're being taught, then what is the actual purpose of HE? Is it just to like sort of bring people in, get them to memorize a lot of stuff and give them a certificate at the end? Or is it really about engaging and enriching somebody in a deeper level of learning and education that, like, they've worked hard to be able to have the freedom to get? And so I think it's important that when we start with students, especially thinking about deco, is about unlocking and breaking those ties that sort of separate students from being as much the architects of their education as well as the receivers of education. um so I think that's important there. And so, speaking to your question, Toby, I think what's actually really interesting there is that, like, the reality is that, like, with a lot of this work, and like, let me be candid, like, we're seeing this with like the resistance from the government we have today. Like, they don't acknowledge decolonization to be a thing that we need to do. Some people will not want to get on the bandwagon because, like, it's not even a bandwagon. Some people don't want to come on this journey with us because they're so well established and benefiting from the system that we have today that thrives off of colonial legacy. But the essence of it is that, like, if a foundation is rotten, it's going to fall down. It's like, that's the essence of it. Like, I've got plants. I always love I have plants in my background because it gives me great analogies. But like, I've got plants here. Like, if the roots of my plants were rotten, the plant is going to die. Like, it's inevitable. And so, like, unless you're willing to like restart and go, like, start fresh, like, it's not good. Like, the system now is not going to ever be sustainable for you, so you're inevitably barreling yourself towards an inevitable end to a system that, like, just hasn't worked ever for everybody. And you are trying to enable it to continue to exist even though you know it doesn't work. And so, like, if people don't get on board, which is a really, really unfortunate, like, reality that we're probably going to be seeing, I think it's important to know that, like, they are not the be all and end all. Like, if we are rebuilding, we will rebuild, and like, whatever happens, the inevitable will happen, and that's just something that they will have to deal with. But I think it's important that, like, the people that do not want to get on board probably have a misunderstanding of what decolonization is and how actually it's for the benefit of everybody, and whereas the system we currently have right now is the benefit, it only benefits a few. And that's really, really important in this.
Thank you very much, Hilary. I think the one thing that I think is most powerful is, the fact that you mentioned the misunderstanding. And I guess that's where the learning and unlearning comes into play. That's where we have to do our part to ensure that,
Mm.
people have, good understanding on what we're doing this in the first place. I mean, fantastic, fantastic. Like my brain is lighting up with so many good comments right now. But there are a couple of comments that just come in, and I particularly like this one as well. It says, "How did you both start journey into decolonizing movement?" Do you gonna go and then I'll go?
Yeah, sure. That's a really interesting question. I love that you framed it as a journey, because I think it is a journey. Like I don't think it's this sort of thing that you suddenly subscribe to, because like for me, I think it started because I actively like acknowledge my reckoning
Mm,
with the world that we live in. And so in terms of how I always speak about my journey, I think unconsciously I started it from like when I was too young to even be able to pronounce decolonization. And now it's like a really tangible thing. And so if just to give like a quick whistle stop tour of it, when I was younger, so I always love to say that like the way I was brought up, I was born in the UK, brought up in the UK, but like in my house, I was brought up in Ghana. Like in my house, it's Ghana. Like I don't know what's going on outside of my front door, but like I was brought up like as if I was born in Ghana. That was the reality. And obviously with the privileges of being able to be in a country that like has like the resources and the like things to make sure that I had the opportunities that I have. And like I give my parents all the props for that, because they've made, my future um work for me in ways that they've really had to work hard to make sure that me and my siblings could have the opportunities that we have. And I remember like that being raised like that meant that I was constantly at conflict with like the worlds I was living in, because I would leave my house and I was suddenly in a different world and in different society and environment, and there was a constant reckoning with that. And so the first notable moment that I always talk about is when I was in primary school. I think it was primary school. I won a competition. I drew a really bad picture, but somehow I won. I don't think a lot of people entered. That got me into a tour of Parliament. And the foundations of this is important because I grew up like listening to my parents talk about, Ghanaian independence all the time, and celebrating Ghanaian independence. It was something that I was really, I grew up really, really proud of the fact that like my country, Ghana was the first country to get, independence in Africa, but like my country was able to get independence from colonial rule. And so anyway, I won this competition and got to go on a tour of Parliament. So I just thought fancy and thought that it was like the biggest day of my life. And I remember we were in a voting lobby and we went to the end of the lobby and there was a book there, and it had all the names of these countries and like all of these histories. And so like I was going to look for Ghana, of course, like that's my place. And I remember looking through, and when I found it, the name Ghana wasn't actually in there. It was actually the name that, we were called under colonial rule, which was the Gold Coast. And so I remember being there and something in me snapped. And I feel so sorry for the tour guide because something in me snapped. And I was just like, hey, like, this is not correct. Like, why is it like this? It needs to be changed. Like, something's not right. Like, do you not understand that the struggles that we had to go through to get independence and to not be recognized and stuff like that? And so that was sort of my first like ticking point to be like, oh my gosh, like Hillary, like this is more than you think. And so in my journey, I sort of like went into secondary school, and when you're in secondary school, life takes over. You're a teenager, you're just trying to reckon with identity in general. And actually, when I got to university, that's when the reawakening of it in the most tangible way happened. And it was a few things. So I went to Bristol, and Bristol, you would know, is historically like not very diverse. So I remember being one of three Black people in my course. And having to reckon with like the fact that like my blackness became a thing that people actively like pulled out from me. So like I grew up in London, so I grew up in a space where it's diverse, so you see people that look like you and look different all the time. And going to Bristol, like it became a thing that I was Black. Like it became a thing people talked to me about, like, oh, like where are you really from, like, oh, like Stormzy, do you like Stormzy? Like I got all the questions. Um and so I started to really reckon with race and my identity in my race, and the histories that have informed the ways that my identities have been shaped by race. And by the time we got to the end of university, skipping through a lot of stuff, I managed to like just start my dissertation, and normally I have my dissertation to hand behind me to show you. But I remember writing my dissertation on access to education for primary and secondary school children in Ghana and Burundi. And I went through a critical discourse about the sustainability development goals that the UN are doing. And I didn't realize it then, but that was sort of my breakthrough into decolonization and really understanding the fact that, like, you know, colonial rule wasn't just something that happened and ended, but it was something that happened, impacted, embedded things. And even though like countries had got independence, it had not fully been dismantled and deconstructed. And so the elements of decolonization that we still see today show that colonialism is still very much alive in the world we live in today. And so for me, like in having that revelation, I just like, the reality is that the journey really in the most active sense really spurred on by my obligation to actually like take us to a space where we can truly be free and actually see that freedom in every aspect possible, and in the way that we acknowledge the dirty past but also like uproot it and do something new, do something that actually, you know, recognizes the impact that it's had on us and actually looks to change that and transform that. So that's like a long-winded but whistle-stop tour of like my journey in decolonization, and I would love to say that like it's still going, like I'm still learning, I'm still discovering, I'm still like on this journey, and I grow every time I'm in a space where I recognize the impact of colonial legacy. I recognize even where education can be done better. And so that's me, that's my journey. And it's by speaking to people like Toby and people I've met on the movement that like has continued to grow that journey for me. So hopefully that made sense. I don't know if it did, but
Honestly, I mean, there are a couple of things that I didn't even know about, so it was really, really good to like, hear you unpack all of that, and it's just like me in the sense that it's still a journey for me as well. I haven't, I haven't gotten to where I would want to get to, which would be an ideal world where decolonization is actually being practiced. So, but I guess just to just make it very quick. Growing up, it wasn't really, unlike, it wasn't really something that I had to face because I'm from a predominantly black country, and it's not like, I mean, it's just so different. You don't really talk about race, for instance. You don't talk about your stats, your status. You don't talk about all of those things. But then I came to the UK for my master's, and I wanted to study international relations and diplomacy, which I did. By the way, I'm from Nigeria, in case you're wondering. So yeah, I did come to the UK, enrolled for a master's in international relations and diplomacy. And, being international, I expected my curriculum to be very diverse. I mean, it's international relations, right? It should be relationships between different countries, different states, and like just giving me a broader knowledge on what diplomacy is like within all of these different states and countries. But then majority of what we were being taught were just case studies of the United States and the United Kingdom, once in a while France, majorly China for most part. In fact, my dissertation had to do with China, Chinese diplomacy. That's which now in hindsight, I wish I delved deeper, to kind of like find the relationships between African diplomacy and the Western diplomacy. I noticed that the curriculum was very, very Eurocentric, very Westernized, very, simply put, white. And I got confused because I'm like, I mean, I paid so much money to come here and study something international, something that will broaden my horizon. I mean, we watch CNN all the time, and it's usually American politics and all of that. I don't want more of that in my education. I want to be able to, expand my knowledge base. So yeah, that happened, and then fortunately for me, I ran in the elections to become a postgraduate officer, and then again president. And I think this year, being president of the student union at the University of Birmingham has really, really opened my eyes to a lot of things, because from the NSS scores that we had, that's the ones before this recent ones, the black attainment gap was significantly low. Black student satisfaction levels were very, very low in comparison to white student satisfaction levels. And I was like, you know what? Hold on, just wait a minute. It's a chap. I don't know if you're on TikTok, you might know the reference, but so yeah, I was like, wait, hold on, what's going on? I've had my own fair share of experience at the university, and I've felt like it's too Eurocentric. So what are these students feeling? That means we must have something in common. And then we decided, you know what? let's delve deeper into this priority campaign, Black voices. Let's talk to our Black students. Let's find out what it is that they're feeling, because we can't, start the journey based on just my own experience. It has to be something that, is probably a wider problem, and we can, you know, delve deeper into. And turned out that it actually was a wider problem. We spoke to our Black students, and they mentioned a lot of things, around microaggression, about their curriculum being white. And it wasn't just, in the humanities or in the arts, and the arts and humanities. It was also in the sciences. And I was like, yeah, this is a wider felt issue. Let's do something about it. Let's decolonize the curriculum. It wasn't my idea to say let's decolonize the curriculum. It was what our students wanted, and we said, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to lobby the university, be in conversations, and then transfer that into tangible actions. And then we decided, you know what, we cannot go in blind. We need more information. And this is why, one of the reasons why we're having this conference, bringing in experts from within higher education, from outside of higher education, to talk more about, decolonizing the curriculum. How do you start if you want to start? What is it like in practice? Give us case studies. What has worked? What hasn't worked? It's not just now. It's more than just us trying to gain that knowledge, but we've extended it out to so many other people. There's so many different people from different universities in this call today, and they have already signed up. And it's about, like, we recognize that this is a wider issue. Let's learn together and let's make change together. Um, so yeah, that's my journey so far. That's where I started, and this is where I am at the moment. And I'm hoping that, you guys are here to learn with us in this journey, and to, give us insight on what you think we can also do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and I think for whoever asked that question, I think it's important to know that, like, sometimes you're on the journey and you don't even realize that you
Mm,
are. And like, say for example, if something that's on your mind is the Black attainment gap, if something that's on your mind is like inclusivity or whatever universities like to call it, but if you just want students to have a better experience at university, like, already your mind is moving in decolonial spaces,
yeah,
and that means that, like, you're already moving towards what is naturally a decolonized education and decolonized system. And it's important that, like, in that space you feel welcome to be educated and learn more, and actually, like, get more into this in a way that really enables you to contribute in the ways
yeah.
that you can. And I think that's really, really important, really important.
Yeah, certainly, Hillary. I agree with you. Yeah, that was, yeah. I didn't expect to say that much, but thank you so much to the person who asked that question. So we've got more questions, about six more questions. And I think there's also a comment in the chat. So if we could do like 2, 3 minutes per question ish,
Cool.
and then so that we can, like, answer people's questions and round up if we don't have any more questions. So this is from Sean. Very, very good question. Sabs from last for a year, unusually two. Hi, second year Sab. So permanent SU staff, that's student union. Permanent SU staff often have other agendas. How do you sustain change? This is a fantastic question.
A really fantastic question. And I think it's hard being in the student movement because we're all
Mm,
constantly, like, there's constant turnover. What I would say is that, like, I think, especially in SUs, first it has to start with strategy and purpose.
mm-hmm,
And I think sometimes, and this is me being completely candid, I think sometimes, because student unions have such a big focus on making sure that students are supported and represented, sometimes it means that you get sucked into responding to and making sure that you're shaping everything that the university is doing, that sometimes the independence that you need to have as a students union to strategically move towards a better space for students as a baseline, gets taken away because you're constantly just trying to keep a grasp on, like, let's be honest, the university not doing a madness. Like, that's what it is. What I think is important in that is that, like, strategically, I think it's important that, like, where some SABs might turn over and might not recognize decolonization as the language of what they're doing, I think it's important to understand that, like, SUs have a massive purpose in moving towards a decolonized education, because inherently, if your job is to make sure that students are supported, students are able to thrive, students are able to have the best university experience, at Bristol our tagline is the best student life or something like that. um you know inherently, like, everything that happens in decolonization should be your agenda. And if it's not your agenda, I'd be worried that, like, it's steering too close towards what the university is trying to, like, constantly get you to do, rather than actually you moving towards your purpose as a students union. So I guess that's my answer to that. But like, I think it's important that, like, we're learning as a students movement all the time, and I think it's really hard when you get that turnover. But as we grow and learn, we'll find ways of making sure that change is sustained, and hopefully, as a national representative, I can support with that. So really, really good question. I think that's a really important question.
Thanks, Hillary. And you managed to stay on 2, 3 minutes as well, which is fantastic. Just on that, if you can, answer in 1 minute, just putting you on the spot a bit. Do you
Yeah.
think it would be controversial for student unions to include, their belief and their stance on decolonization work in their beliefs and commitments and in like the laws that govern them or all of that? Just thinking out loud, just thinking out loud.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mm,
Um, well, I think, okay, so this is a tricky question for me,
mm,
because I think it's hard, because there's the charity commission stuff that we always need to be aware of, that, like, we're abiding by the charity commission, which is a little bit at odds with
yeah.
decolonization. But I think, like, in the same way SUs should be loud and proud about fighting for students' rights and students' ability to learn in a free environment. I think they should be as bold to be able to include decolonization in that. And, like, I think in being bold like that, people actually see that you've got a clear purpose and direction you're
Hmm.
moving in. So I think, like, if it's controversial, I mean, like, it should be, because if it's controversial to the university, that means that you're bringing in real change. And,
Yeah.
like, isn't that our purpose?
Yeah, that's definitely something to explore. Any sabbatical
Mm.
officers in the building, think about it, see if that's something that could work. And there's another question: what tangible change can we ask our student leader and societies to make while alongside their studies? Good
Yeah,
question.
really good question. I would say a few things to that, actually, but I'll be really quick with it.
Mm,
I first of all think that it's important that, like, understanding that this work doesn't look the same in every area, like, is okay. And just because somebody is in a certain role, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing, like, decolonization in that space, because it might not be the space where they have the tools to be able to do that work. But what I would say is important in engaging student leaders and societies is actually recognizing that it's important for decolonization to be involved in the work they do, to really ensure that they're engaging students with that activity, to really enjoy that in the fullness of it.
mm,
And so I think student leaders and societies set the narrative and set the course for all of this. And so ultimately, getting them on board of decolonization means getting them on board with making sure that, like, they have greater engagement, they make their spaces, inviting, inclusive, and transformative for the students that are going to be in the spaces with them, and the students that they lead. So, like, that's the most basic response that I can give, but I'm sure there's more nuance to that, like, we'll be developing as we continue with this decolonization journey.
yeah, and even throughout the conference, there's so many interesting sessions. There's sessions on how to actually start to campaign on this, and so just keep an eye out for that. Thank you, Hillary. So this is from Rebecca. I'm running a masterclass for student reps on discussing decolonization in student staff forums soon. How do we best empower students to challenge existing processes and or encourage on learning in academic staff? That's a really good question.
That is a really, really good
Yeah.
question. So a few things there, actually. I think, first of all, how do we empower students? I think empowering students is, like, exactly the right language. And I think you being in those spaces with student reps is as much engaging them with the work that is important, but also empowering them to actually take up the spaces upon which they now occupy. And so, like, I think a big part of that is encouraging and enabling students to get a self-realization of the power they now hold as student reps in the forming and the movement of the university, of the educational experience. And so it's important that, like, in doing that, they will be able to find that confidence to challenge processes in the ways that they feel fits wherever they are, if that makes sense. And
Hmm.
so I think enabling them to be empowered, to know the power in which they yield, and also engaging them in the content to be able to meet that power with knowledge, and
Mm-hmm.
knowledge is power. Um like it really brings them to get to a confident space of challenging existing processes. And where we speak about encouraging unlearning in academic staff, I think this is exactly where student partnership has to come in. You know,
Mm.
you can't encourage unlearning when there's a hierarchy that means that staff know everything and students are just like feeding in. I think, you know, when you go into those spaces, establishing that students are partners in those spaces, those student reps are partners and architects in those spaces, means that like you level the playing ground so it can you can actually be in a space where change is promoted in a way that like everybody's voice matters and everybody's voice holds weight. And therefore you can wrestle with knowledge and encourage unlearning and relearning, and convincing and unconvincing in a really streamlined way. So hopefully that speaks to your question, but of
Y-
course you have
Yeah,
my
that's
email for details.
yeah, that's actually very going to be very, very useful in case, any questions have not been answered to your satisfaction, or if you think there's something that we've missed, or just something that you need more um, uh, explanation on. Hillary will be happy to help. And I just wanted to add on to that and say, I guess another thing is to understand your why, like why you want to do this, what your intention is, and to also, be able to demonstrate to the people that, you're trying to bring on board that it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter if you're black or white or from any other um, racial group, that you can get involved. And I guess that's why we constantly ask the question of, allyship. What do I do if I'm white? How do I get involved? So that just remembering why you want to do it regardless of anything else, and being able to communicate that across, and helping the student representatives to see that, you can do something. You have the voice, like you said, Hillary. um, okay, good. So we have 9 minutes left, and we have three more or four more questions. I think we can do this, Hillary, right? Can we? Yeah. Okay, good. So this is another question. Do you have any advice for getting the word out about the need for decolonization in the COVID era? I literally had this question down to ask you. Where everyone is relying on posting on social media, etc., because it's easy for student voices to get lost in the news feed. Very, very good question.
Yeah, I think, yeah, really, really good question. What I would say is that it's important that, like, especially when you're relying on posting on social media, really make sure that you're amplifying and centering the voices of those that have been doing the groundwork for all of this. That's literally all I can say, because I think sometimes we bog ourselves down in trying to create something new or trying to do things ourselves. But like there's already stuff out there. So amplify those voices, center those voices, and make sure that when you're in the spaces where you can talk about it, do talk about it, and amplify those voices, give them spaces in those rooms to speak about it. And whoever wants to listen will listen, and whoever won't, don't worry about them. We'll find a way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Hillary. Well done. Another question from Sean. Key people in changing the curriculum are the university learning and development departments who run teacher training for academics who are now required to get national qualifications, often called PG certs. Yeah. They train 100s of academics a year at Birmingham, and it's heavy. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think this is a question. I think this is kind of like, what universities can also do to like be a part of the conversation, just train colleagues or train members of staff. But Sean, if I missed the question there, please feel free to pop in the chat again. um, there's one from, okay, anonymous. Many of our programs have pretty low numbers of Black students, but surely ensuring that we have strong student representation for Black students is vital in our efforts to decolonize the curriculum and the institution more broadly. Now, how can we encourage our Black students to use their voices and feed into decision making without overloading them? And I'll add, without making them feel targeted.
Yeah, I great question.
Yep.
So there's a few things. I think it's important that, like, even though your programs might not have a lot of Black students still exist and still should have a space to feed
Yeah.
in. And so I think a lot of the time when you see Black students in programs not engaging, it isn't because they don't want to engage, but like there's a few things. They don't know how to engage, or they don't feel safe engaging. Those are the two things that I see most happening normally.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that, like, you need to allow them to create those spaces for themselves where they can engage, where they can feed in and feed in confidently, knowing that their voices are going to be heard and that they're going to be included. So that's the first thing that I would say, especially in decolonizing the curriculum. The second thing that I would say is, when it comes to feeding into decision making without overloading them, I think it's important that, like, when we're thinking about decision making, it isn't like asking Black students to tick box a decision that's already been made and you're just making sure that, like, oh, it's EDI approved or like Black student approved, because that just doesn't work. How you don't overload Black students in decision making is by involving them and actually letting them lead in decision making, and therefore that means that inherently your decision making is inclusive of Black students, and therefore that overloading doesn't happen. The final thing that I would say, which I'm quoting everyone today, but Professor Olivetta Tell, who's at Bristol now, professor of the history of slavery, said something really interesting at an event that I was with her in the other day. And she said, especially for our white allies and those aren't Black or aren't people of color, in this space, it's important that, like, in this work, you're willing to step up, but, like, step back when you are, like, doing this work. So step up and do the work with us, support us in doing the work, but step back and, like, don't feel like that work needs to be having you in the limelight or you at the center. Like, be there supporting us, working with us, but don't use that as an opportunity to put yourselves in the
Mm,
spotlight or center yourselves in doing the work, because that's often where there is a miscommunication of responsibilities and overloading and all of the stuff that continuously puts us in a cycle of not being able to work together well.
yeah, that's really powerful. I think I'm going to take a moment after this session to think about that again. Step up, step back. And there's one in the comments, in the chat box, from Annie. Maybe if more Black students work in the government sector, curriculum will be changed. What's your take on that?
I mean, I don't know how accessible the government sector is for Black students. Like,
Yeah,
that's just the reality of it. It's like, in an ideal world, sure. Like, I think Black students and more Black people in the government sector would be great. But I think, like, we already live in a society where, like, Black people are very underrepresented in positions of power. Like, you can literally look at the parliament demographic and you'll see the diversity, of like Black people, like Black women, let alone Black people
yeah,
in those positions of power. So until those spaces are accessible, for Black people, and actually invite Black people in a way that doesn't cause them trauma, like, like, I think, it's ideal, but Black people need to be safe in those spaces to be able to do the work and be confident doing it. And right now that space, quite frankly, just isn't a safe space.
hmm.
um that's my take on it anyway.
Wow. Uh, I don't know what to say. I'm highly speechless, but that was really, really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we have 3 minutes more, and it's enough time for us to wrap up and say if you've got any comments, perhaps not questions, and maybe feedback, reflection on what we said so far. Anything else that you thought was really useful for you, feel free to pop it in the chat. And yeah, we can't take any more questions, unfortunately, but Hillary, thank you so much for
Thank
joining us
you
this
so
morning. I've
much.
really learned a lot. This like you have like a bank of knowledge, and I wish I could just still some from your
Wish.
brain, but it's been fantastic. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
and I hope people have found it useful as well. Feel free to put your reflections in the chat.
I hope so too. And I think
Yeah,
I just want to I want to leave on saying thank you so much, Toby. Like, this conference is amazing. Like, I'm genuinely in awe of how much work you and your team have done to put this together.
thank you.
But I think for everybody that's come here and are either hearing this for the first time or trying to develop their knowledge on it, like, remember that this is a collective, movement. So,
Mm,
like, none of it should be alone. You should never be alone in this. And so, like, please do reach out if you want to, like, build those communities and those spaces where you can learn and practice this.
yeah,
But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been so good.
you're
Like, I think this
welcome.
might be my best. So
I'm
thank
glad.
you.
I'm really glad. And thank you for all the thanks in the comment section. And I'll just say, please, if you haven't already, join us on our Discord server. You should have received the link along with your Zoom links for all the sessions, just so that we can continue sharing ideas, continue the conversation. And yeah, and just so we can stay in touch. And yes, the day is still packed with a lot of exciting sessions. So I'll see you all in the next couple of sessions. Thank you again, Hillary.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.